Just give it a second because awesome. So I'm more than happy to be here today with you all again after 1 month. We didn't have it in June, so I did feel a gap or something missing in my month last year, not being able to see all of you and to share in this space with you. So I'm glad to be back. And I'm so happy to be here today with Faith Addicott, who is an avid traveler, a dog lover, a steward, a coach. And I like the way she describes herself as well as a weaver, organizational Sherlock, mad inclusionist, and future delver. Very, very cool. So Faith is calling in today from Portland, Oregon. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Faith, to take us along with you on your journey. Thanks for being here.
Cool. Thank you for inviting me. It's always great to be in community. I made some slides, partly because, as I explained to Jeff and Maya, I tend to range if I don't give myself a path to be on, because there is always so much to talk about when we're in these spaces with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Give me just a second to manage tech. Everybody see that okay? Yes, thumbs up. Cool. Well, thank you for being here. I love that Jeff brought up a journey as well. I mean, I think it's very much my intention of how I'm going to hold a little bit of space today. And we're going to do this, I think, a little bit differently maybe than has been done a lot. So I'm just going to do a quick little walkthrough of some kind of ideas around, my journey and how I'm bringing this work into the world. And then I'm going to stop and Maya's going to ask me some questions because I really enjoy being responsive. And then it kind of can grab some of those different ideas that maybe didn't make it into the pathway of this slide deck. So just a little thank you on that. Part of the reason I leaned into truth with those questions is I think that's something that I want to talk about in terms of my journey. I mean, I think, as you said, Stephanie, it changes all the time, right? So, and our understanding of the truth changes all the time. And one of the things I think about is, what is the difference between the truth and my truth, right? One of the things that Peter asks us a lot is, what is the inner transformation? What is the work that needs to be done in our own minds, in our understanding, in our hearts, and how we carry ourselves in the world that begins the transformation of our communities, our societies, our organizations, right? And I'm kind of wove a little path for this journey with us here today. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about being human and calling into that place where we can see inside of ourselves and know ourselves enough to begin the work. I would like to talk a little bit about language, stewardship, invitations and gifts, and then courage. I think all of us have a little bit of a different truth because we're human. And there's a way in which all that we can really, really know is what we feel, is our own experience, right? Absolutely everything else comes through some sort of mechanism or a filter, like we see via light waves, right? And the mechanism of our eyes that turns things upside down for us, right? How amazing is that? We see and experience our lives through the context of our past experience, through the context of who's in the room. I will experience this moment differently because of who's in the room with me, right? And that's what one of the things we like to say is, the people in the room are the right people. Well, they're the right people for this experience that we're going to have, and that's immutable, right? Because it's the only people with whom I would have this exact experience. One of the things that I think Peter calls us to a lot as well, and this quote I think speaks to that, is that so much of what we kind of know or think of as true or experience as true is very much internalized paradigm, things that we almost can't recognize, right? We can't see it because it's so big in us. And of course, language, right? Even in this moment, as I'm speaking with you, I'm using words, and those words define a space, and they define a shared meaning that we have, or maybe not. Maybe for folks for whom English is a second language, or who experience or have had a different context even of the words that I'm using, we could be having slightly different meanings. I read a great article that was talking about how language kind of cages reality, and that's why I'm using this language of caging, because every time we choose a word or define something or name something, we're not only naming what it is, we're naming everything that it's not, right? So if I identify something and I say, oh, this is a lemon, and it's because of my understanding that that's a lemon, I automatically have removed it from possibility as an orange or an apple or a banana, right? And that's kind of a simplistic way of thinking about that, but it gets especially true when we talk about ideas, right? If we begin to name and create containers for truth, for reality, for the way that we experience the world, we define parameters. And the reason that this is important is that having an understanding of that, I think, brings us into how powerful our own truths are and how we intersect with the world. And I don't know that we necessarily pay enough attention to our own truth. And I noticed that, we asked, what is the truth? What is the truth that brought you here today? And maybe I should have asked, what is your truth that brought you here today? And there's a subtle difference in those things. And I think if we ask for your truth, is the way that we approach that different than if we ask for the truth? The truth, oh my gosh, like everybody's saying, what is that? We could take forever. It changes all the time. We don't know. What about your truth? Does your truth change all the time? You think there are things in us that do shift and change as we grow and evolve, as we become new people, but there are also things in us that feel, as someone said, immutable, right? Something about us that is us, right? And that is the thing that we bring to the world and the work. And we use it in different ways, but it's that kind of internal truth that gives us the power to affect changes in our external reality, right? This is one of my favorite quotes from Peter. And I will say most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, I came to Peter's work really not through structured belonging, but through stewardship. It's a book that I picked up when I was doing a graduate program in public administration. And I thought, oh, stewardship and public administration, this makes a lot of sense. And I started reading it. I got about 20 pages in and I stood up and I threw the book across the room. I was so angry because I'm like, this thinking is from 1994. Why aren't we doing this? Why isn't everybody talking about this? Why isn't this the center of how we approach, how we hold each other in organization and the world? And I was like, ah. And then I took a deep breath and went across the room and picked it up and devoured the rest of it, of course, and used, that kind of frame in it. A lot of what I wrote through 2 graduate programs, actually, because I think it's become really central for me, this idea of stewardship. And part of that is I'm even an advocate for, I have a huge paper about it. If anybody wants to read it, it's my soapbox. I talked to Maya about it a little bit. I was in a leadership and development class in my organization development master's program. And they asked me to write a paper about what the leadership of the future would look like. And I wrote them a 22-page paper about why we should stop talking about leadership. Stop using the word leadership, stop using the word leader. it's hurting us. I believe that. I believe we should start talking about stewardship. I believe we should start talking about nurturing. If we want to identify decision makers, great, call them decision makers, right? If we want to identify change agents, great, call them change agents. But there's this mythos around the language of leadership that unfortunately inherently includes this kind of individualized exceptionalism. It's not collective. When we talk about leaders, much like we were using how we use language, when we talk about leadership, we don't talk about everybody else. When we talk about stewardship, we talk about everybody. And I wonder sometimes, given the power of language and how much it defines, this quote from Peter has been like a cornerstone of how I work, right? So if I want to affect transformation in the world, I need to think about the language I'm using. I need to think about the cultural context of the language I'm using. I need to think about how I'm saying things. I think that's especially true when we're now in this place where we need to be really thinking about what is couched in colonialism, how much of my language represents white supremacist ideologies that I don't even think about, right? And so I really want to hone in on this idea around the power of language and the power of our very careful thoughtfulness about the truth of it. What is true and what we say and what isn't, or what is mutable, right? Stewardship, I think, asks us to be more aware of those things. I think when we talk about leaders, we think about, going forward. The word literally comes from a Scandinavian word, which means the front of the boat. It's like the person in the front of the boat who, points the direction, and then the people who are rowing go that way, right? Is the person in the front of the boat the most important person? Or is it the people who are rowing? Because we wouldn't get anywhere without them, right? This quote is fabulous. Particularly the part is, to claim our freedom as an act of service is a destabilizing act. And I hope that one of our goals and one of the things that we share together, I think it's implicit in so much of Peter's work, is this idea that, a destabilization isn't a destruction, that a destabilization opens space for creative, reconstruction, if you will, that there's, without that shake, we have no room for movement. So kind of thinking about that and thinking about how our minds shift, right? When we enter these different spaces, and it's when our minds shift and we enter these different ways of thinking and moving and holding each other, that we have any capacity to affect meaningful substantive change. I know that there's a lot of conversations in between and that they're very important. What I find in my practice is that the things I tend to use most often are invitations and gifts. And it's because, as we talked about, and Jeff, as you mentioned earlier, these ideas around command and control that are so central to so much of how organizations work, right? You look at that hierarchical, what does your org chart look like? Oh, it looks like this. And on top of the pyramid is a giant thing pushing everything else down. And then we think about what that drawing of the org structure looks like, and what it tells us about power, and what it tells us about freedom, and what it tells us about value, and how can you possibly sit in that structure with impunity and hold the inherent and magical value of every human being, right? And maybe there are ways, and I think some of the ways to mitigate that a little bit are to be super intentional about the invitation to be in spaces, the invitation to work together, to remember that your position in an org chart does not give you mandate to own the intention of another human being, right? That intention to work together, that intention to achieve together comes at invitation. And I believe very strongly that the more that we can talk about and be intentional around invitation, whether it's to a meeting or into a project or into a grassroots community organization, it changes how we are together. And then of course gifts. I mean, part of that is, as I was saying, the magic of each individual person. And this is what we can do, right? We can't do it all. We can't maybe know the truth. We can't individually, each of us, walk out the door today and transform the world that we live in. But we can hold space for that. We can invite others to that. We can honor the wholeness of every person. And we can continually try to know our own truth and be aware, even if it's shifting, right? And then lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about the courage that takes. You know, it's the yes and no conversation. What do I say yes to? What is the no that I'm holding? I don't know about you, but I was called a dreamer when I was in elementary school. Oh, she's always spacing out. She's always daydreaming. She's always thinking about things. You know, we got to focus on the task at hand. And I remember thinking, why is dreaming so bad? Right. And I've come to understand that dreaming is an act of courage. Dreaming assumes possibility. It allows for a positive future, right? Or if we dream, we're taking a risk. It's when we shut ourselves down from dreaming to be safe. Oh, well, you know, those things will never happen. That's when we are really at risk. But I just want to remind us all that dreaming is an act of courage, and that everything that you dream and bring into the world is a truth of its own. And that we're making that future together. So, yeah, that's my little chat for today.
Amazing, Faith. Thank you so much. And thank you for the beautiful visuals as well. I feel like it really rooted me in everything you were saying. So yeah, thank you. And there's a lot, I was jotting down all of the questions I had for you as they emerged, but I'll go one by one, kind of in the order they emerged for me. So going back to kind of something from the beginning, of your presentation, I really think that, you know, language does have the power to shift realities and the social context in which, you know, we operate. I was wondering if there was a time or an incident that stood out for you as like being like a story of a time where it stood out for you in a way that it really struck you.
I think there are a lot of times, one of the things, you know, like in my work, if I go into an organization, one of the things I immediately start looking for is what are the words they're using, right? Because there's a story that they're telling me about their organization, right? Oh, this is true, or that is true, or I'm like this, and this is how I do things. And then I watch the words they use, and the words they use tell me something different. Right? So if I go into an organization and someone says to me, well, I really have a lot of hope for this organization, and I really think that we can do these great things, and we're just going to implement this problem, and I don't care how much they whine, they're just going to have to do it. I'm like, okay, great. This has told me a different story, right? And the story is that there are some us and them ideas happening here. This story is just from one word, from the word wine, right? You just described the people with whom you co-create your organization as if they were children, who can't decide for themselves what they need, right? So now I have a space for intervention, and that intervention is just around language, right? And so then it becomes a slow coaching around, you don't want to call out and like have anything, but it's slow coaching around language. And then we say, okay, maybe what we need to bring here is conversations worth having. We need to be focusing on our statements and our depreciation and knowledge, right? And I see that all the time. I think language is so telling, particularly when you get into environments that are, either very positive or have some toxicity. I watch how many times people say thank you, right? And that comes from a gratitude place, but it's also just using the words instead of assuming, right? The language that we share with each other. In some ways, it's right. If we're not in conversation, Maya, then we can't know each other. We can't learn from each other. And the conversation is through words, it's through language, right? So it's super important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of like the, replacing that, even the word, leader with something like convener,
Anything.
host, or steward, or so many things that we are, or that anybody has the potential to be. And I think that that's one thing, I think it's from Community, that really stood out to me. Was first time I read the book Community, I thought, yeah, everybody, why do we make it seem like there are only some people in the world who have the capacity to take this on and to make decisions and to be decision makers? Because that really lies within all of us. There's no secret formula for that. And diving deeper into that concept of stewardship, for me, when I had the chance to talk to you before, something that stood out in my mind is how often stewardship and service kind of emerged as themes throughout your journey, even when you were working outside of kind of the OD realm. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how that's been significant for you?
Yeah. My parents are both teachers, right? So talk about learning service at home, right? The 80, 90-hour weeks, the total commitment, the work on the dining room table all the time, and their complete dedication to that, right? And then not complaining, but talking about their kids. Oh, this, Susie had this happen today. I'm really worried about our parents. Maybe we should reach out. They worked in the same school, my folks, and my dad was actually a school counselor and my mom was a teacher, and they spent their time in service to our community, in service to the kids in our community. And they were indefatigable. Like they just kept going, and through tears and through chicken pox and through all the things. And I think that's something. And then of course, all their friends were teachers. So I heard all the stories at the potlucks. I think that's something that really impressed upon me, how rich their lives were, how much meaning they held. And I looked around, and I'd go stay at another friend's house, and their dad was like a businessman. Just didn't have the same feeling, right? They didn't feel as kind of powerful and potent. And so that's always something that I wanted to lean into. And I think part of that idea around even just why community and being in the world together, if we're not in service to each other, what the heck are we doing here? Right? My community doesn't exist because I'm here. My community exists because we're here. And so this idea of public service, I kind of turned into this field by going first into public administration, and then discovered I really didn't want to work in a beige cubicle at all. And also that government needs a lot of organization development help. So I kind of pivoted around and turned into that, first through appreciative inquiry. I studied at Case, but really thinking about, I think we're all, anybody who's an OD is essentially in that field to make the world a better place. I mean, that's the organization is a mechanism through which we do it. It's a place of leverage, right? We can't necessarily all go out and help every individual, and society is a giant thing, right? and the world is a giant thing, but the organization, right? If we can transform organizations, if we can shift the language in organizations and how we understand power and how we understand the value of each other in those spaces, well, then every one of those people in that organization is going to be healthier and happier at home. They're going to carry that worth and that value. They're going to carry those new ideas and new ways of thinking into their communities. You know, we're going to see better school results. We're going to see less policing necessary. We're going to see lower incidences of crime and mental health issues, drug abuse. All of those things come from how we are together. And being of service is the way that we can make a difference in that. And I really believe that almost every OD practitioner I've ever met has something in them that's called in that direction. And maybe we don't name it enough. I think one of the reasons that I've always been attracted to Peter's work is I feel like he names it. And that feels good to me. So on the leadership thing, Maya. So when I started researching that paper I was talking about, I did a little Google search for how many definitions there are of leader or leadership on the interweb. 4.5 million definitions of the word leader. Don't just type in leader, I type in definition of the word leader. And there's over 4 million. And what that tells me is we don't know what the heck we're talking about, right? Because we're not sharing language. We're sharing 4 million different ideas about something that we spend $6.5 billion a year on. Why? Right? I don't know why. And if we want to make it more clear, we do things like we say servant leadership or humble leadership or transformational leadership. But I'm pretty convinced what we really want is humility and service and transformation. And I don't know that the leadership word needs to be there at all, because that leadership word takes it away from us. It's somebody's job. This person, this exceptional person, is going to make things transform somehow. It has to rest with us. And I think the leadership is dangerous. I mean, I just look at the world that we live in right now, and you look at the continued disparities and, you know, how CEOs, right? Still only 6% women, y'all, right? Do you know how many Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies there are? 5. Not 5%, y'all. 5. So if this is the paradigm of leadership, then it is not serving us. And if all it takes is a change in language, well, that seems doable. Until you go to a conference and start talking about this, and people tell you that you don't know what you're talking about.
That's it.
But anyway.
Beautiful. Love the story and the journey, Faith. And one thing I just wanted to move into, you talked about the destabilization not being destruction. And I think as I listened to you share your story when you were younger and told that, you know, you're a dreamer type of thing, it sounded like that may have been one of your destabilization experiences. Can you think of other times on this journey, Faith, when there really was, for your own thinking as it's evolved, gone against the current state, if you will, where it was destabilization and it wasn't destruction, it was actually almost life-giving? Just interested to see in that experience if you evolved, or maybe that's just getting more curious about your own beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to pin down. I think it's you know, it is this journey that we're talking about. It's this, the more that I have become, I don't want to say confident, because I actually really don't like that word. But the more that I have become aware of my own truth, the more comfortable I feel speaking in ways that I think are disruptive. And I think there's so many ways that happens. I think that's true for everyone, right? The more that you know your own truth and the more that you can speak your own truth, the more that when you're in rooms where power is unkind, which I think power is often unkind. The more you're in rooms where you see microaggressions, where you see storytelling that isn't healthy, where you see subtle racist tropes, where you hear evidence of misogyny or sexism or belittling of other human beings for any reason. I think the tendency, when I was growing up, and, kind of what I was, told in school is like, well, you just be polite, right? And you don't want to upset anybody. And I don't think that's true. I think you do want to upset people. I think you do want it to not just be polite. And it doesn't mean being mean. And it doesn't mean being judgmental. And it doesn't mean shaming. It just means rooting down into your truth, getting settled, and then speaking it into the room and saying, hey, what's happening right now is not okay. And here's what just happened. Did anyone else notice that? Let's talk about it. Is this something that happens all the time? Right? And the people who are experiencing harm are going to say, often will say, yes, this happens all the time. And the people who are perpetrating the harm will say, I never noticed. Right? And you can't make those shifts. You can't disrupt those harmful patterns unless you have the courage to root down and say something, right? And is that disruptive? Sure. Is it destructive? No, not at all, right? It's kind of like the difference between owning a constructive disagreement, right? And maybe it's even conflict. Maybe it gets to the point where you just like really, everybody feels uncomfortable. Things aren't working. Everybody's a little bit hurt. And you root down into your truth and you work through it with each other, right? And that is extremely destabilizing because you're not just brushing it under the rug. You're not just keeping going. You're not asking people to be quiet. You're asking people to speak hard things. And that's always going to be disruptive. It's a small disruptive. I'm a huge fan. I don't know if anyone's read Adrienne Marie Brown. She wrote a little book called Emergent Strategy, which is just stunning. It's stunning. She comes from a background as a Black woman activist, and comes into these concepts that I think are just super OD concepts, kind of from this different lens. And, in her work, she talks about that disruption as such a positive thing. That again, when we think about stability and safety, right? What do we mean by those things? Or not safety. I'm not going to say safety. I'm going to say security is the word that I'm looking for. I'm thinking of that Ben Franklin quote that those who trade liberty for security get neither. Right. And thinking about if we're in a world that is an ecosystem and we're in communities that are systems, that if the pieces don't move, nothing can grow or change. And in order to move, sometimes you have to disrupt.
Well, so much to think about and to delve into, Faith. I think what we'd like to do now, we'll shift into a breakout room. What we're going to do here is just as you've had a chance to listen, reflect, look at it and the images and any of this experience as Faith has shared, what struck you about what she said? Maybe what was disruptive for you inside as you kind of think through this. So we'll go into some breakouts. I think we have 10 minutes for this one as well, Maya, for the breakout. Is that where we have set up for that? So 10 minutes just to explore. And again, just remember, you're not trying to convince anybody. You're not trying to give advice. Just be in there and just share what's coming to mind as Faith has guided us and opened some doors maybe to her journey. What struck you about what we've experienced now? And we'll come back in 10 minutes for a large group interaction.
Well, Jeff, this is Fatima,
Yes,
and I want to interrupt and disrupt and destabilize for a moment.
Sure.
This is a very small group, and going into breakout rooms, I think that Faith brought a tremendous experience and thinking to this process, and it would be so wonderful to be in a real conversation that is including this small group. It's not a large group. And I think that it sort of takes us away from the engagement that is happening through the energy that Faith is bringing about this notion of language and language creating our worlds. So that's my offer. And you don't have to take it. You don't have to do anything with it. You can just say, well, no, we're going to do what we're going to do, or we're going to do that. So that's where I'd like to bring something into this space.
I appreciate. Thank you for your disruption, Fatima. And I will, as it's not destruction. Let's move into staying as a large group. And if it feels a little clunky, we can always break later. But let's move into this. I agree to kind of have it. It's a small enough group. Again, as we're in this group, let's listen. Let's be attuned to our own time and our own listening, and let's move a little bit further into. So let's stay here. And the question again is, what struck you about as you listened and interacted and had some experience with Faith?
I'll start if people are trying to wander, like we do wander, right? So I want to, first of all, thank you, Faith. I love the way you introduced. I love the way you gave image and thought to this notion of words and how words create our world, and that we can change our world just through our language, and how we are approaching each other. One of the things that really stood out for me is this notion of truth, and what is truth, and whose truth, and how does your truth become formed? Is it malleable? Is it, stuck inside of the white box thinking? Is it stuck inside of colonial thinking? And when we don't have a space to express that, then we see what we got in the world. We have violence, and we have a lot of disruption and unexpressed conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing, because we live inside human bodies that are always in conflict with something. And so I just want to just say, really, thank you. And this is the next step in the evolution of facilitators inside of these spaces, is disrupt the language. Disrupt the language in a way that it can shift something inside of the environment, the social environment, the work environment, the community environment. So the last thing I want to just add is that if we suppress, which we cannot express, the space for unexpressed experiences and emotions become distorted. And they become distorted inside of unexplained, unknowing violence and inarticulate desires. When expression finds its way through the darkness, then the social cultural traditions that constrain and contain us, that expression doesn't have to become distorted. It just can become what it is, an expression, and that the submission to the human spirit is what changes the human condition. And the fact that distortion creates cultural distortions, the unexpressed conflicts create distortions of our culture that don't allow us to be human with one another. So I just wanted to just bring that into this space, given what you just, really, first of all, I don't know where you are. I'd like to know where you are. And I'd also like to be in communication and conversation with you, because I'm doing some things in communities that are experiencing a lot of violence, experience the humiliation of society, and how, in fact, does language help us to shift that? So where are you anyway?
I'm in Portland, Oregon.
In Oregon, okay. And yeah, That's good enough. And I will share my information. I'd love to be in a conversation with you.
Thanks, Fatima. What else struck you, others, as you listen to Faith?
I was struck by how Faith told the story of going into an organization and sort of talking to them about, and I guess I'm filling in the blanks, or kind of what I heard was maybe what is your vision and mission statement, or what are they trying to accomplish? But then hearing someone say, well, you know, we're just going to put this new initiative in because we have, you know, a lot of have to language like that, not choice. And if they whine, oh, well, so be, you know, the whole idea around the possibilities conversation, when Peter talks about even, you know, the idea of vision and mission is looked upon a lot of times, oh, this is what we're dreaming into the future or whatever, but it's not the same as a possibility, you know, that it's really, it's words. And so the whole theme of language being the pivot point, you know, really stood out for me in what they shared. Thank you very much, Faith. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, there was certainly no invitation in the way that person was describing what was going to happen in the organization. It was like not what might happen, but this is what's going to happen, and there's no invitation there. Right. And for sure, when there's no invitation, there's less possibility.
I think what's showing up for me continues, you talk, Faith, is that I'm on this destabilization, destruction piece, but I think what's, you know, that it takes courage to speak up, just takes, you know, courage to destabilize a little bit, but the destruction comes from not speaking up, right? That's the shift, right? It's I'm afraid to speak up to cause it, but by not, I'm probably creating more. And as Fatima, as the violence and things come up because we don't take the courage, and it's such a juxtaposition. I'm not going to speak up because I don't want to destroy yet, but by not speaking up, I'm destroying, right? So it's a very humbling thing to think through on when I've chosen not to speak up for whatever my lack of courage was at different points.
Yeah, there's you know, I think most of us have experience with change or talking about change. And the thing is, people don't seem to realize it's like, oh, well, I don't know if we want to do change, or, oh, we don't want to upset this thing. Like, well, change happens whether you want it to or not. Change happens all the time. The question is not whether or not we're going to change or whether or not we're going to challenge something. The question is, will we change with intention in the direction that we seek to go? Or will we just be carried along? Right. And so often that just being carried along is harmful. And I think we can't separate, you know, these choices from the realization that so many of those things that are uncomfortable for us to confront are actively harming folks. Right. Maybe not me, but people I know. Right. Or anybody at all, even if I don't know them. Like, do we allow active harm to come into the world, or passive harm, right? Or things that we think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I don't need to confront that right now. It's not that big of a deal. It's too much work. I don't want to get into it. Right. I think we say that. I've said it in the past. I don't want to get into it. It will completely derail this meeting. Okay. And now I'm at the point where, like, if I say that thought in my head, it will completely derail this meeting. I'm like, okay, then that's what needs to happen. Because if we don't make those shifts, why should that meeting stay on the rails? In those circumstances, like, it's probably not going to get us where we want to go anyway. So as you said, it's right. Yeah. Right. Staying on the rails will probably cause more destruction than just disrupting it for a minute.
Hi, Stephanie. I hear
Hi,
stuff.
sorry.
I hear
Go
stuff
ahead.
coming. I hear you talking, but it's nothing coming out of your mouth.
You know, I was hesitant to take it off mute because they're doing tree work, and I just thought it might be too loud, but I'll be really quick. Thank you. You know, I really appreciated what you were talking about with stewardship, because most of my work is in environmental protection and sustainability, and so it made me. I enjoyed hearing the origin of that word, but it made me want to look up all the definitions of stewardship and the way we look at it differently, because we certainly need help in this in this space I'm in, and so maybe moving more in the direction of community and kind of the essence of what we're talking about in that field would benefit from that. So thank you.
I might be shifting us into the gifts conversation unintentionally, but I will do it actually a little bit intentionally. I just want to say there's something you said earlier about how when you became more aware of your own truth, that you're able to, you know, say something that might be disruptive. And I think one of the gifts I've received from you today is that statement. And it links back to a gift actually, Fatima, I received from you like in December of last year, where I showed up to one of these gatherings and I was like, I think I just spent the entire strategic planning being disruptive. And you said something that just like made me, because I was really like, oh, am I destructive, you know? And Fatima, you just, I don't know, I can't remember your exact words, but it just grounded me in how important it is for us, yeah, especially us ladies and like young ladies as well. So thank you for that. And yeah, I just think like also, I listened to a TED talk the other day that was authenticity in the workplace is a lie. And I thought that that was a really interesting kind of angle of this similar conversation, which is we're often asked to be our full selves in the workplace, but if that doesn't fit kind of the white box or the white male idea of what it is to be okay to be your full self, that it can be harmful and dangerous. Yeah, it was by Jodi Ann Burley, actually. I think that the name might not have been that, but she was who gave the TED talk. And I just was blown away. And this conversation is really reminding me of that, but then also just like allowing me to dive deeper into that thought. So that's the gift I take away today. So thank you so much.
Beautiful, Maya, which moves us then into gifts. So what gifts, what's moved you? What has somebody said or done in this session that has had impact for you?
So, Faith, I want to just say that the gift you've given me today is to know that a white woman from Oregon is bringing resonance to my experience and the world. And I appreciate your forthrightness and your speaking into a truth that resonates with me. And so I'm grateful for that gift, the gift of you.
And I'll speak to you as well, Faith. You've resurrected the stewardship piece, which is what actually even the predecessor to that was the empowered manager piece that Peter talked to, and then evolved as stewardship, and it was so much ahead of its time, unfortunately. In fact, people rejected it. I remember, because it was so far away from the dominant stories that I've experienced and everybody else through there. So just it's resurrected in it through it. It's the time is now. Time has been for a long time. So thank you for. I'm going to need to go. Well, I will go back and reread some of those key pieces, because that also informed this community work and informed it as it goes through it. And it is, as I read it, it's still fairly radical thinking. It's just, and I also, for the gift for me too, Faith, is it's radical thinking for those who claim and are trying to be leaders, as much as it is for those who we are as followers. We are buying into that story as well, and we are supporting the story of the leaders that we put out there to give us security, certainty, and predictability. So there, it's a both, and it's just fascinating to move into that. So thank you for resurrecting that in me.
It's a really good book.
What I found so valuable, Faith, was you're talking about the power of disruption and destabilization. And that struck me as consistent with my own experience as a practitioner over the years. But I so love the way you expressed it and its value, and also to Fatima for illustrating its power.
All right, well, why don't we are close to a couple minutes away from our time that we have allotted today. I could stay in this conversation for a long time, and it's nourishing and life-giving. But just as a fellow sojourner on this journey, Faith, what would you like to, what struck you at this point as you had a chance to share? What would you just like to share with us, that's on your heart and your soul as we begin to separate and go our separate ways today?
Just gratitude, always gratitude. As I, entered the space with gratitude, I'll leave this space with gratitude and hold you all with me for the rest of today. And the thoughts that you've brought and shared. I want to also just thank Fatima for that beautiful sentence, that the submission to the human spirit is what gives us the transformation of the human experience. And I love that. That's fabulous. And I'm gonna keep, I wrote it down, I'm gonna keep it. And I just, we are, all of us in this room, very smart people. And I will challenge us that that's not enough. That we also need to dig a little deeper and own our truths, seek them, look inside, and be brave. And there is something that I like to share with folks as a reminder. There is no organization. There is no government. There is no society. There is no technology. There is no word that was here before we were. We have created these things, and they are our responsibility. And we can recreate them, but only if we know that we have the power to do so. And that power has to come from in us, between us, and then moving into the world, right? So that's, I guess, my disruptive challenge for everyone to carry with them as we enter a weekend, and then hopefully a week of transformative, evolutionary, people-centered, awesome work in the next week.
Wonderful. And I think you, Faith, you put your contact information in the chat if anybody wants to reach out, any resources that Faith, they're very active in a lot of things. So please, anything that we want to stay connected with, learn more about the great work that Faith is doing, please reach out directly to her and share what we're learning. So, and also the invitation for any of you on the call or folks that you interact with to know we continue to look for storytellers. I don't think it's a painful process. I think it takes a little bit of thinking, but just to share. This might be a way for us to be disruptive in the world, is to tell your stories in places to see where it would go. So thank you, Faith, for your sharing, your being, your doing. Thank you, Maya, co-host extraordinaire, moving things work welcome in your written and spoken word. And thanks to each of you for investing your time, your energy here and as you move forward. So go forth and be disruptive. That's the piece. Be disruptive. So thank you, folks. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Maya,